Hi everyone, today we're going to be looking at texturing in SketchUp. So what I've got here is a cube, I've got an arch and I've got a sphere. And I'm going to show you how to texture flat surfaces, how to texture curved surfaces, how to transform and rescale a texture. And we're going to go over how to texture individual parts of a surface like this as well. So let's get started. We can very easily start texturing by going up to the paint bucket tool at the top of our screen. And when you click on that, you'll get your default tray appear on the right hand side. And you can see that we have a materials panel. If I close everything down so it's a little easier to see, on the right hand side here. Now, depending whether you're using a PC or a Mac, the initial panel might appear different. For example, on a PC, the default panel is colors, whereas on a Mac, it's usually 3D printing. To switch between all the palettes that you get by default when you open up Photoshop, just click on the little drop down menu and you can see we've got all these palettes loaded up already, and you just click and swap between them as needed. Okay, so if we go to wood, for example, to use any of these textures, I just click on the one I want, hover over the surface I want to texture. Let's zoom in on this cube here, and I click. Dead straightforward. Now, most of the textures that you get in SketchUp are actually quite low resolution. You can see here, we don't have to zoom that far in to really see the loss of quality. So you may want to use your own textures. And when I say that, I mean, just images you've downloaded or you've taken photos on your phone or a camera, anything like that. If you're on a PC, to bring in your own images, go up to this little cube here with the plus symbol in the bottom left-hand corner. When you hover over, it says Create Material. Let's click on that, and we get this little texture creator appear. And in the bottom half, we have the texture section, and we have a little folder icon. When we click on that, it'll open up our directory. If I go to my downloads, I've got this little tile icon here. I'm just going to click on that, click Open, and you can see my material has now appeared in this little menu. And if I click OK, it's now in my folder. Now, when you're jumping between all these different palettes, it can be quite hard to find any textures you've brought in. So a real quick way of finding them is to click on this little house icon on the left-hand side. That will load all the textures that you have in your model. So you can see there, we've got the color of Chris here. We've got the tiles I've just loaded in and the wood flooring that I just painted on there. But for this image here, I can just click and paint, and there we go. Now, often, as you can actually see here, when you bring in your own images, they're often distorted or they're really, really small. So to change the size of this texture, let's get the select tool in the top left. Let's right click on it, go about 2/3 of the way down to where it says texture, and then go over to position. When we do that, you see our texture now repeats, and we have 4 colored icons here. Each one of those, when you click and drag on them, will alter a certain property of your texture. So for example, the blue and the yellow ones will alter perspective. The red one will simply move it around. But in this case, we want the green one, which will allow you to shrink it and rotate it as needs be. So actually, let's make that a lot bigger. Now you can actually see that even though I've done that, the tiles are still distorted. So there's a second way that you can edit your material, and that's by going to the Edit tab in the Material panel. Here you can see that we've got 2 values for the texture. Okay, we have a width and a height value, and we have a chain connecting them both. What this means is that the aspect ratio will be maintained no matter what you change these values to. So for example, if I highlight the width value, I'll change that to 2000. You see the bottom one changes accordingly and my texture is still distorted. So to shrink this back, I'm actually going to break this chain by clicking on it. I'm going to change the height value here to 2000. And you can see my image is restored and it hasn't changed the top value. So there's a very quick way of altering your texture. Now you actually need to use this method when you're dealing with curved surfaces. So let's get my paint bucket tool and apply that texture to the arch here. And you can see that that has applied fairly well. But if I right click on it, you can see we don't have a texture option. So the only way to resize textures on a curved panel is to use this method by going to the Edit tab. So let's bring this down to 1000. Let's bring the bottom one down to 1000 as well. And you can see it's resized the texture. Now, you can also see that as I've resized that, the other texture on the cube has also resized. So what happens if you want to resize just one part of your model? It's really straightforward. You just right click on it and you go down to Make Unique Texture. And that will now effectively separate this texture from that one. If you go to your Materials panel, you can see now we have duplicates of that texture and we'll be able to resize this. Now, the third and final thing in terms of applying texture is when you're dealing with objects like a sphere, okay, when they're curving in more than one direction. If I get my paint bucket tool and I click, you can see that the texture is applied, but it's incredibly fragmented, okay? It's just glitched all over the surface of the model. And the reason this has happened can probably be best explained by, imagine if you've got a football and you have a square bit of wrapping paper and you try and wrap that football. It's not going to go on smoothly. It's going to crease, it's not going to be completely smooth. That's effectively what's going on here. So one of the ways we can fix this is by projecting the texture onto the sphere here. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to go to my shape tools and click on rectangle. And I'm just going to draw a rectangle over here like so. I'm then going to select that, get the move tool, and I'm going to move it up and over my sphere. It doesn't have to be all the way over, it just has to be above it. So effectively, what we're going to do is we're going to add a texture to this rectangle, and then we're going to project it down onto the sphere. So let's get our paint bucket tool and paint it. There we go, there's our texture. If you want to resize it, best thing to do is to do that now. So let's say I right click, go to texture and position. Let's maybe drag this out quite a bit. There we go. I'm going to right click on that texture again, go back down to texture, but instead of going to position, I'm going to go to projected. And it doesn't actually do anything visibly. But what it does do, if we right click, go back to texture, you see that now projected has a tick next to it. So this is now formatted as a projected texture. And to effectively project that down onto the sphere, we get the paint bucket tool, hold Alt on your keyboard and click with the dropper tool on the texture you've just turned into a projected texture, and then click on the sphere. And you can see that that texture has now projected down. Remember, because of the projection, it will distort on the sides here when it's 90 degrees to the projection plane. But you can see on the top here, it's formatted quite nicely. So if you are actually trying to replicate projection through textures in SketchUp, this is an ideal way of going about it. Let's just quickly change the color of that sphere to something quite plain. Now, what if I just wanted to texture one little panel here? Okay, what if you're maybe doing a tiled wall yourself and you've sectioned it up? How would I go about doing that? Well, the easiest way to do that is to go into View in the top left and turn on Hidden Geometry. And Hidden Geometry will show you all the polygons which make up the object that you have in your world space here. So you can see all the dashed lines show me a polygon. If I change my color now to this one, because I've got hidden geometry enabled, I can go around and color each polygon separately. And I can go to View in the top left, and I can turn hidden geometry off, and there is my sphere partially textured there. So there we have it. There's how to texture in SketchUp.